Well, that's interesting because they're kind of the same response in terms of how I came to where I'm at and the story that I'm telling about God. Because um, so one of the things that you get from this complexification narrative is that, yeah, okay, if the universe starts with the Big Bang and complexifies, and you go from matter to life to culture, or matter to life to mind to culture, and there's complexification that's increasing at all these levels. Well, that continues, So culture, the level of culture is complexifying. It's complexifying is because that's kind of what defines the culture level, is the emergence of symbolic language. So our linguistic codes and the concepts that we use in culture continues to evolve and to complexify. And God is a concept in culture. And so the God concept continues to complexify. So as it does, you can start to chart that evolutionary progression of the God concept. And, when you do that, you see the shift, the metamorphosis of the very idea of God from that sort of old man in the sky to these different conceptions, right? And very simply, you could, so my next book, the one I'm working on right now, really gets into this stuff in very deep, a lot of detail, and uses a lot of examples and everything. But like if you go all the way back to the dawns of human culture, when we lived as foragers and that sort of a thing, there was still a God concept. The God concept was more inchoate. It was, diffuse. It was sort of, it was animistic in nature. So there was sort of a blurring between the subject, what we would think of as the subjective and the objective. And the anthropological literature gets into this stuff in some, clarifies things to some degree on this. And there's talk of mana from the anthropological studies of these different cultures that have shared similar God concepts. And so we can see that is a pervasive psychological idea in these cultures at these complexity levels. And then when you start getting the early state and agricultural societies, and you start seeing the rise of Babylon and Acadia and these sort of like old Mesopotamian empires and things like that, right? Then this new God concept comes online because of the complexification of culture. So the God concept then shifts to something more anthropomorphic, and then you get deities, you get the gods, you get pantheons, you get the gods of Homer and the Indian pantheon and whatnot. And these are beings that are powerful, anthropomorphic beings, still largely amoral, but that's kind of the God concept. And you can mark that across culture at that particular level of cultural complexity. And then that evolves into this sort of universal, being the kind of transcendent cosmic judge figure, and that sort of is closest to that old man in the sky idea of God, right? It's somewhere between that kind of like, the gods pantheon, Homeric sense of like an anthropomorphic figure, but it also has a sort of moral element of like, the heavenly Father looking down from above and being up in the clouds and that sort of a thing. Right. And that comes from a specific stage of cultural complexity. But that's not the end of it, right? So the God concept continues to evolve. And then you start getting the advent of, actually reductionistic science, which is where the story kind of links back to itself, because that early scientific revolution is really undoes that whole pre-modern conception of God and really challenges it. And so then you start getting kind of scientific conceptions of the ultimate. And there, the God concept shifts again. You can either have like a personal relationship with God, or you can have God is sort of the deist vision of like the figure who set all the laws up and then kind of step back, or various forms of kind of rational religion, let's say, and that can take different forms. I mentioned at the outset my interest in apologetics, right? And I think that people who are kind of at that stage individually are keen to rationalize religion, but that's sort of a late stage of the pre-modern God and hasn't yet kind of fully taken into account the insights of, the depths of the insights of kind of, the scientific modern worldview. Now, that is sort of where God evolves to up to that point, but the process keeps going. Culture keeps evolving and complexifying. You get the transition from modern culture then to postmodern culture, and then we start appreciating that a deeper sense of the universal aspect of the quality of the deity and the paradox and the mystery and all these sort of ideas start to come online. And then you get the transformation from postmodernism to metamodernism, and that is sort of the paradigm that I'm situating emergentism in. And in that paradigm, that's when you actually get the self-conscious story of complexification and the evolution of consciousness has been unfolding. And in that kind of level of complexity culturally, that's where you start seeing ideas about the evolution of consciousness and elevation of consciousness and the mysticisms that start to be grounded in an appreciation that like the self is what is undergoing this kind of broad evolutionary journey through time, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, my point there is that when we talk about God, we tend to assume that God means the old man in the sky because that's kind of the most popular God concept out there. But that really only represents one form of the God concept that comes from a particular stage of cultural complexity. And so what I'm trying to do with emergentism, for example, and other people are doing in different ways as well, is trying to articulate a more up-to-date God concept. And that does require sort of reconceiving, reimagining, rearticulating what God is in light of now these narratives of complexity and emergence and that sort of a thing. So that is why I feel justified using a word like God in this book, because I think that you can trace the continuity of this idea through time, even as you see that it evolves and complexifies. And so I'm trying to articulate, a God concept that is sort of at the cutting edge of this complexification process, and also owning that this is not the final version either. There will be additional changes and evolutions and metamorphoses to the God concept that lie in the future. But those are still hidden from us. But this seemed like important work to be doing at a time when that older God concept just isn't working for people. The old man in the sky, people justly are like, well, that's silly. That's not how this works anymore. But if you think that that's what God means, then you're stuck, because you're like, oh, okay, well, if the only way to believe in God is to believe that there's some man in the sky, well, I'm not going to do that. And I guess if I can't do that, then I have to adopt this sort of nihilistic, meaningless stance that supposedly modern science is all about. Or I can just put my head down, hold my breath and believe it and become a fundamentalist, right? Because that is sort of the God concept of prevalent among fundamentalist religions right now, is some version of the man in the sky. So that's sort of the impasse that we're at in trying to make meaning, spirituality in the modern world right now. Is like, am I a fundamentalist who believes in the God man in the sky, or am I a nihilist who believes that no, that's all hogwash and there is no meaning? And what people don't yet realize is that, well, those aren't your only options. There are other things that have come online over the past 50 years, let's say, in the evolution of culture, which is ongoing, where more complex notions of meaning and purpose and even God exist. And so my emergentism book is trying to, bring those to people's consciousness and help spread those conceptions, because I think that they're urgently needed.